Hey everyone, welcome back to the Bonsai Escape. I'm Mike G, and today is all about Chinese elms. This is actually a cork bark elm, but they're the same thing. So stay tuned, I've got a lot to share with you. All right, the Chinese elm. A lot of people start with the Chinese elms as a new bonsai. It's a great tree. They're very resilient. I'm going to go into a lot of discussion about caring for them and how do you work with a Chinese elm. These are actually cork bark elms, almost identical to a Chinese elm. It's just that the bark characteristics later on, as the tree matures, becomes more corky and aged looking. But I'm going to share with you a little bit more about that with one of my bigger trees. But the elm is a great tree to start with. It's a great beginner tree if you can stay with the discipline of watering and checking on it, because they do like to be wetter than dry. They definitely do well in the sun. I leave mine out in the sun. I'm in Michigan. These that I have here all sit out in the sun for most of the day. So as long as the roots are healthy, as long as you've got plenty of water, the tree thrives. And so definitely a great tree. They're extremely resilient. All my elms have always been deciduous. Some species of elms tend to hold their leaves during the dormancy winter periods. Mine have always dropped leaves, and that's something I'm expecting. We're in the middle of September here, so my trees are just starting to kind of prepare themselves for winter, and I'll share with you what I mean by that. But this is a cork bark elm, just like your Chinese elms, and when you get your trees, they're probably styled a little bit better than mine are, and I'm going to share with you why I haven't styled my trees. But this is a new sapling. This actually started, I'm going to show you the tree that it started with in a second, but this started last spring with a root cutting from the original tree that I was repotting in the spring, my large cork bark elm, and it was just a root cutting that I said, let me just throw it in a pot and see what happens. Long and behold, I put it in this cup. It was only a little nub sticking out about an inch or half an inch, and I got a nice little sprout coming up, and this is the result of just this year's growth. This was in April, May, June, July, August, September. 5 months, 6 months, and this is what I've got out of it. And you can see the trunk has gotten nice and thick. You can tell where the root was down here, and it's filled in a little bit of taper, and we've got a nice little sapling now to start working with. You may be wondering why I haven't done anything with this tree. I also have all of these as cuttings from the large cork bark that I take. Some of these are 3-year-old cuttings, some are 2-year-old, and some are just this past year. This was just a cutting I took. I had a couple extra ones. Because I had so many, I said, you know what, I got to slow down on how many cuttings I take with these. But this one, and I've got 2 in here that are cuttings from this year, this spring's trimming, and they've rooted. They're amazing. They're growing well. I've got some back here in the back row. Let's see, I think this is a 2-year, this is a 3-year-old cutting that I've never touched. I've just let grow. The trunk is getting nice and thick, as you can see, maybe, and I'm just letting it grow wild. The more growth it has, the more it feeds that trunk and establishes a thicker base. So that's what I'm really going for with all these cuttings that I have. This was actually a air layer, or I think it was an air layer. If I remember correctly, from the large tree I'm going to show you in a second. But this came from the top of the tree that I'm going to show you, and that's why it has a much thicker trunk down here. It was the actual top leader of the original tree that I cut it off of. And I remember when I took the air layer, it hadn't blown up inside the bag of sphagnum moss, but I figured it was such a valuable part of the tree, is so thick, that I'm going to see what happens. And this is just this year. I took that air layer last fall, and this is it rooted, and it's got great growth. It's really a unique looking tree. You can see the the actual trunk coming out this way, and then it has this arch, and it's pretty thick around here, and then it goes off to the other side this way. And this is going to be a fun tree to start playing with. In fact, I need to get down there and see what the actual base of the trunk looks like. I've got it covered with some sphagnum moss. That's what I use for a lot of my trees, to cover the topsoil. It helps with keeping moisture levels consistent, and also allows for air to breathe, and it's also antimicrobial, so it does help keep the tree healthier. So this is what I do with elms. They're very simple to propagate. Once I get a cutting in the spring, I put it in a little cup with some potting soil, and I cover it. I basically use these buckets, or I use the storage boxes, the bins. I'll put a handful of cups of cuttings in there with a little bit of water in the bottom, cover the top with some plastic, and leave them out of the sun for a few months. Within that period of time, I start seeing new growth coming out of it. That's what I did with these guys. I literally left them in this little bucket. I think they were in this pot, and this one actually, I just threw them in here. I had 3 in here. One of them started to take. It still has some green tip on it, but it's very minimal. But 2 took, and so that's what I do. It's very simple to propagate a Chinese elm cutting, and maybe next year when I do that, when this other tree I'm going to show you, or maybe these trees, I'll do some more cuttings with them. Now the question is, Mike, why have you left these trees just grow wild like this? Well, they're young trees. I really want, and what I learned about working with elms is they're very resilient. And my one tree that I worked with, which I'm going to show you in a second, I'm teasing you here, so hang tight, is over 21 years old. When I got it, it was about, I'd say probably, it was probably like this big. It was about this big. It's a little sapling. I didn't know anything about it, didn't know what to do with it. And my dog got it off the counter, off the patio one day when I was at home, chewed it all up and left a pile on the ground of dirt, and bare rooted it, chewed on the trunk, and I thought, oh, there goes that tree. It was only a couple bucks I paid for it, but long and behold, it regrew, and it was actually the new tree I'm going to show you. They're very resilient. I repotted this before I really understood elms or bonsai. I repotted this thing in many different times of the year, which I didn't know anything about, and it would lose all its leaves. It looked like it was dead, and it would start to come back. And that's when I kind of started learning kind of the phases of and the timing of working with an elm. With these guys, they will lose their leaves this winter. By December, January, they will be completely bare. They'll look dead. And then I take these guys, all these young ones, I actually bring in my garage. It's an unheated garage. They sit on a shelf in the garage all winter. It gets about 40 degrees, sometimes 38. It doesn't get to freezing. I don't want the roots to freeze on these young trees, which is why I don't put them in the outdoors. The large tree, my large tree, I do leave outside. It's got a big pot in it, and I'm not too worried about that one. I cover the base with mulch, and I protect it from the wind. It's deciduous, so it's really not going to affect the foliage on it. Well, now I've kept you in suspense for all this time, so let's take a look at the elm I'm talking about. Now here it is. I know what you're thinking. Maybe it's not this massive specimen tree that you may have been thinking, but this tree, what it looked like a year ago, is incredibly different. What it looked like 2 years ago has changed even more. I didn't really know what to do with these elms when I first got them. So when I started watching this thing grow, and it was 20 years ago, it grew these long shoots, and I just let it grow. Well, what happened was, initially, I did that for about 5 years, and I just let it grow. And I got these long branches. I get these really long branches like this guy up here. I got this long branch, straight, no movement in it, no taper in it, and it forced thickness of the trunk, but it was really not that good looking of a tree. It had some curvature in the trunk, and then all these straight branches going out, and I didn't really know what to do with it. So I started learning a little bit more and experimenting. After I messed up the tree in repotting many times, I realized, well, you know what, maybe I can take some risks with this tree, because it always came back. It always thrived. And this was back when I was in California, so I'd always have to handle the heat in California. As long as the roots are safe, your tree's going to live in the sun. Just got to protect it from excessive heat and cold, wind, because that's what dries things out. So with this tree, you can barely see the trunk now. This has grown out so much, and I'm doing this on purpose because I really want to add some thickness to this trunk. Unfortunately, when I repotted this a couple times a year or two ago, all this gorgeous cork on the bark kind of started flaking off because it was thick, and now it's starting to thicken up again, and it's starting to get the cork design like this on the bottom. If you can tell, if you can see that, it's starting to get some of this corkiness look on it. Unfortunately, I didn't really understand what Nabari was back in the day, and so I kind of just let these roots do whatever. I've been slowly trying to work the roots out, but they're very thick, and which is where I got one of the root cuttings from the last time I did this. But this tree had a very different look to it, and I'll show you the picture of what this looked like. And at the time, a lot of people thought, gosh, that's a gorgeous looking tree, but there was some big flaws in it that just drove me crazy, and I couldn't correct them. Typically some scars that I had, and they actually looked like two eyeballs looking right at you. It was horrible, these little bullseye eyeballs in the middle of the trunk facing you. And so I made a very bold decision, and I chopped the whole thing off. That's where that other cutting I got came from. This guy came from the top of this tree. Don't even ask me. It was something like this. I don't remember. But I got really bold and decided I'm just going to trunk chop this, and it was left with virtually nothing. I wanted to reestablish branches because some of the higher branches were thicker than the lower branches. I really felt like this is one of my favorite trees, and some of it's because of how rapid it grows and how fast it grows, but also it's just a gorgeous tree when it's refined. But I let this grow out for the last year and a half. I haven't touched it. I've done a little wiring on branches, selection of branches down here that I want. Now I've got a massive thick branch on the bottom. I've got a branch in the back that I'm not sure I'm going to keep. I may just use that as a sacrifice branch and cut it off because I don't know if it really adds to the composition of this tree. But I'm really just trying to thicken up the base and the trunk. It has really good taper now through the trunk itself. As I said, I have some wires, and I had to wire this top piece because it was so flimsy, but it's gotten very thick now. I'm not going to keep it to this height. It'll probably be close to this height. This will be a cutting that I take in the spring probably, but I wanted to see where I could get some branches established. I've got that going now, so it's going to stay like this. I was tempted to trim it, but as I mentioned, it's end of September now, or middle of September. We've got fall coming, and this tree is starting to prepare for winter. So the more foliage, the more sugar that it can produce, and the more long-term storage capacity it has for the cold winter. The cells of the tree filled with water will actually freeze in the winter, right? Under 30 degrees, 32 degrees. When they're full of sugar because of the photosynthesis process and the storing of that sugar for dormancy, that freezing temp drops to 28 degrees, so we get a little extra frost protection. So again, this will stay outside in a cold storage, won't affect it at all. I'll cover the pot with some wood chips or some moss, and not moss, but wood chips to mulch to cover it. So when it comes to working with elms like this, I'm learning to be a much more patient, letting it grow out, kind of establishing what I want. Now in the spring, I am definitely going to cut, probably just before spring, I'm going to trim up some of this tree and get back to its main structure, because when the spring flush comes, I want to be very specific about where I generate that energy and which branches get it. What's also interesting is when that new fresh growth in the spring hardens off and you can trim, you're going to see all these shoots sprouting out, Once that green leaf becomes darker green, not light green, the tree's hardened off and you can cut back. What you'll notice after that first flush of growth that you cut back, you're going to get even more growth. Elms are just so vigorous that you probably will trim yours 3 or 4 times in a year, and that's okay. I wait right about after August. I won't trim any deciduous trees, especially the elm. I just want to maintain its vigor for the spring and the dormancy that comes. But man, we've got some growth in these lower branches. The longer these branches get, the thicker this trunk is going to get, the thicker the branch is going to get, and feeding the trunk. So it's why I left them on. I haven't trimmed this tree. But this is going to look much different in the spring after I've done some cleanup on it and I can see what's here and start deciding what my apex is going to be, what the top is going to be. And I want to preserve the top as a new cutting, so I'll wait till spring to do that. And so that's not a big loss. But the minute I cut this top off, you're going to see new buds popping out everywhere. It's really amazing. So this is Chinese elms kind of 101. I would say this sits in the sun almost all day. I use a 50-50 mix. I do use some organic material. I use pumice, lava, and a little bit of organic material because they do like to stay a little wetter than they do want to be dry. I rarely ever let these guys dry out, but they really thrive in that condition. So this is probably a good starting point with elms. I will tell you this, most elms don't want to be inside, although you can find a lot of people that argue this point and have elms that stay inside. But I've learned, and especially being in California, that when my elms were outside year-round, because we never got temps below 40 degrees, they never really went into dormancy. They lost their leaves right about the end of February, maybe the end of January. All their leaves finally came off, and then February they sprouted back up. So they never really got more than a 20-day, 30-day dormancy period, really not even 30 days. In Michigan, the last 2 years, these trees have never been healthier, greener, and they're just thriving more. I think a lot of it has to do with the longer dormancy period that they go through, which is close to 3 months. And also the conditions are a little bit warmer, not quite as warm, but there's more humidity here, there's more moisture here, and they just really love that. So I'll argue that you can keep them inside, but they're not going to get that dormancy period that they need. And they love sun as long as the roots are protected. That's why I leave sphagnum moss on top. This moss is pretty dry right now, but the soil is still moist underneath. It helps bring some of that moisture back to the top, so you get some better distribution of moisture in the soil. But springtime is when you repot these guys. As soon as you start to see these little buds popping out, it'll look like a little Christmas tree lights all over it. It's the coolest thing. And then that's the time to repot, right at that point, right before the bud starts to open. Just as it emerges, that's when you want to repot. You got about a week window to do that in. Once that happens, repot it and let it grow. The first spring flush will go everywhere. Trim it back in about middle of spring. You'll have to do it again probably in the early summer. You'll probably have to do it again later in the summer. And then I would leave your trees untouched, your deciduous, your elms. I would not trim them after August, only because they need all that foliage to start producing the photosynthesis sugar storage for their winter dormancy. That's my recommendation. I found that to be the most beneficial, and being in 2 extreme climates, I found that process works the best for my elms. They've never been healthier and look better in with that process. So I'm going to do more videos on this, especially in the fall, in the spring, when it's time to start working on this guy and working on all these guys. This is going to be fun. I'm going to pick some that I really want to start styling. Then I'm going to let some just grow. I've got a really cool one over here. You can hear it's got a couple massive trunks on it. It's got a lower one, 3 trunks going in different directions. But they're just so gorgeous. This tree's already telling me it really wants to have some work done. So I'm going to pick a few in the spring to really start styling for the heck of it. Although 20 years of that other tree that I had, it really didn't matter because it's a process of redoing it. Let me get my camera back up here. The process of regrowing that tree and correcting some of the flaws that it had. That's probably the greatest thing about elms, is that they grow so rapid, they're so vigorous as long as they're healthy, that you can correct a lot of flaws versus, and it happens rather quickly, versus junipers and pines that take forever to, if at all possible, to correct a flaw, meaning inverse taper and things like that. So hopefully this is helpful. Just want to help get you prepared for winter, what to do with your elms, and then we'll see you in the spring when these guys are ready to start doing some work. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe. I have a lot of other videos I'm really planning to do, especially as we move here into the fall, what I'm doing with my trees in the winter time. So hit like, subscribe, let other people know about this, because I really feel like from the comments I'm getting a lot of people that are helpful, and hopefully it helps you. Talk to you soon.